Property taxes in the state of Ohio have gotten absolutely out of control from where they were just years ago. And today we're here with Beth Blackmar, and she is with the Ohio Citizens for Property Tax Reform, which seeks to abolish property taxes. So, Beth, thanks so much for joining us. And I cannot wait to hear more about this. In preparation, I was looking at a couple of stats from Ohio, and I found from U.S. News that Ohio is ranked number 14 in housing affordability, meaning that there's really about 36 states that are better at Ohio for like more expensive.
Yeah.
And, overall, Ohio is number 38 as far as the best state to live in. So that's pretty low. And then Ohio is number 8 for being high in property taxes. So right off the bat, that's the inverse of what anyone would expect to hear about Ohio.
It really is. I mean, it really is. The last I looked, we were number six. We're number six. We're number
Really?
six. I mean, for high property taxes, it's crazy. When you think of who is, I mean, I think New Jersey is number one, but New Jersey has an interesting program for their property taxes. For example, senior citizens, if they earn under $500,000, they can apply for, it's called Stay New Jersey. They can apply for a program and get just straight 50% off of their property taxes, half off. I mean, Ohio just doesn't have anything like that. And our homestead exemption is woefully inadequate comparatively. And, it's these kinds of things that have us ranking in the wrong end of the spectrum as far as livability in the United States. And that's definitely not what we want. We don't want that. But housing values have spiked precipitously in the last 10 years. Even more so over the last 6 years. It's been really just, I think it's been unmatched.
I would agree. I'm in the Dayton, Ohio area, and I have firsthand seen property taxes or property values probably triple. And I know I was watching Ohio Housing Nerd recently. He came out with a couple of videos, and I think somewhere in Northeast Ohio or wherever he is, Central Ohio, his local area had increased by like I think 63% over the past few years.
It's
So,
crazy. It's
yeah.
crazy. And, that, it doesn't matter. I mean, it matters, but I mean, it matters little what your tax rate is when your tax is doubling and tripling. If your property tax, if your values are doubling and tripling, for all intents and purposes, 920 aside, your property taxes are doubling and tripling. And that's what we're experiencing. That's what's happening to people across the board. And that's what, you know, got me involved in this movement was looking at my revaluation last year. I mean, I nearly fell on the floor. I really, Ryan, I almost do it in the recycle. I thought it was junk mail because it kind of looked like that on the outside. I'm like, oh, it's a piece of paper, but yeah, whatever. Another donation for this or that. Okay, and I thought I put it in the recycle and I looked at it and I just saw I see the word valuation on there. And I'm like, oh, well, wait a minute. And I grabbed it and I pulled it back out and I looked at it and I could not believe it. I couldn't believe it. They took my house, and I'm just going to give you, they took my house from $188,000 to $299,000. That was my revaluation. Now, I live in a little 2-bedroom bungalow in Lakewood, Ohio. It's a century home. It was built in 1911. I've got all plaster walls, the original plaster walls. I've got the original wood floor. Nothing's been redone. I don't have any, this isn't any fancy place. It's like I said, a 2-bedroom bungalow with a half-finished basement. The original porch on the front, the original porch on the back. I mean, I love my home because it's got some really cool woodwork. You can kind of see it there in the video, but nothing worth $299,000. I mean, holy cow! And so you can only imagine that even though my tax rate is only 2.63%, what adding all that, that valuation to it does, when you take it from $188,000 to $299,000.
Absolutely. And I guess if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about the movement, I think I accidentally skipped a step in being so excited to speak with you. Would you mind, I guess, just like taking a step back and introducing this movement and what it's attempting to accomplish?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me here, Ryan. I really appreciate it. Anytime I get to tell this story, I want to take the opportunity. Um, like I was saying, my valuation went through the roof. I was panicking, so I called the county and I called my city. Well, I called the county first, and they're like, "Well, we don't really have anything to do with it. Blah blah blah. It's the state. Yada yada yada. It's legislated. We just follow the rules." Da, da, da. I'm like, okay, okay, all right, okay. What can I do? And so they give me these series of steps and said, you can get estimates from contractors, you can get an appraisal, you can whatever it is. So I said, okay, I'll get an appraisal. And so I'm scrambling to get the appraisal and get that lined up. Meanwhile, I I had to scrape together the money to do that because I'm retired. So I just scraped together the money to get the appraisal. And meanwhile, I'm thinking to myself, well, why? This isn't just happening to me. This is happening to people all across my city of Lakewood, Ohio. So why don't I give the city a call and see if they won't do something about this, or at least back us in some way, because we're all experiencing these extraordinary increases in valuation here. Not just me. This isn't unique to me. Um, so I called my city and they blah, 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 passed me along to this person, passed me along to that person. Then I got a big long email back from the treasurer, you know, yada, 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 inside millage, blah, blah, blah. And I'm going, I don't even, first of all, my brain is shutting on and off when you start talking about millage. I don't know anybody that really gets, but it's one of those things that it's just one of these. uh, Property tax law is complex. It really is complex, and which makes it so hard to deal with at a state level. So in any event, um, so I panicked some more because I realized that why would the city look a gift horse in the mouth and really do anything about all this money coming their way? I mean, come on, let's face it. They're not gonna. So so the answer was, we're not going to do anything. We don't have anything to do with that. That's not our thing. And millage, millage, millage. Okay, fine. So I called back to the county. I said, okay, well, I'm going to work on this. But meanwhile, this is gonna be catastrophic for people. This is really problematic. And basically, the answer they gave me was, well, ma'am, if you can't afford it, maybe you need to move. You know, and well, then I got mad. And then I said, you know what? I'm going to move, all right, but it's not going to be like you think. And I was scrolling through social media and I came across this ad that someone put up, post someone had put up. It wasn't an ad, it was a post someone had put up. And it said, save our citizens and something about property taxes. And I said, you know what? I'm going to that. It was at the Hungarian Reformed Church Conference Center over off of Puritas Avenue here in Cleveland. And I went over there and I met a gentleman by the name of Keith Davy, and they had sort of a presentation there, and here was all these people whose property tax, whose valuations had doubled and tripled, and wondering what to do about it. And he said, "Does anybody want to be on the steering committee?" And I said, "Yes." And I raised my hand. I said, "I'm in. I'm in," and that's how it started. And from there, we rebranded to Citizens for Property Tax Reform, because this isn't just save our seniors, SOS, save our seniors. Yes, the seniors probably get hit the hardest here, but it hits everybody when you think about it. It hits the regular family. I'll get back to that in a minute. But it also hits renters. Renters, folks, it hits renters, because when landlords, when property owners, when they're those that pay property taxes, we'll get into that later. But These property owners, the landlords, they get the property tax bills, their valuations go up, their property tax goes up, and they have to pass this along to their renters. And they don't often want to do this because when you get a good renter, a good tenant is gold in the landlord business. But then they have to go to their tenants and say, I'm very sorry, but I've got this bill. I have to raise your, I'm very sorry, but my expenses have gone up and I have to raise your rent. So, contrary to what most folks think, and this is an education piece about this, renters pay property tax. I'm going to repeat that. Renters pay property tax. So, I got involved and took the bull by the horns, and we started going about trying to speak to legislators about property tax reform and trying to do something about it. And it kind of feels a lot better. You don't feel like uh, you feel less like a victim of circumstance and more like you have an action plan when you take action on something. You don't feel so vulnerable. You get more of a feeling of strength to take action. So it's a little, yeah, let's do that. We went and talked to several legislators, and last year there were 40 pieces of legislation uh, addressing property tax and on property tax reform. And guess what? Not one of them went through, Ryan. Not one of them. You know what they ended up putting through at the end of the year? A bathroom bill. A bathroom bill. And I tell you, when I talk to um, folks, I talk to probably on the order of probably about 100 people a day between phone calls and emails. Um, and that's not an exaggeration. That's just the way this is right now with this petition drive. I do ask. It's like, would you rather had would you rather had legislation to reform property tax last year or a bathroom bill? Well, guess what? 100% of people say, Ryan.
Reform.
That's right. They say we're for property tax reform. They say we don't care. We don't even know any people that we don't even know about this. What we do know about is what we're looking at when we get our tax bill.
I
And
would
so,
say I would say one of the most compelling things that I believe I heard you say in one of the interviews that you did is properties are the only asset class that you are taxed on the unrealized gains. And after thinking about that for a little bit, I mean, it's exactly right. And I became a realtor in, I believe, April of last year. And a little bit of the textbook work on that was specifically about appraisals. And in that section, they go above and beyond to talk about they call it all but subjective without saying that. And they go to great lengths to say, an appraisal is only true at a snapshot in time. It's not guaranteed to be right, but less than 24 hours after it was done, if that. So it seems not only is it a tax on unrealized gains, but the very method of taxing it is subjective. You get 10 appraisers, you'll get 10 different uh, appraised values. So I think there's got to be some type of better alternative. And on one of the videos that I saw you on with, again, the housing nerd, I went through, and I believe at the time I watched it, there was somewhere between around 300 comments, or maybe 600. And I went through and read a significant number of those. And I found a handful of the objections. And also, as you're familiar, I signed up our insurance office to be one of the places that you can go in and
yes, thank you so much
absolutely. So
for
Monday to
making sure.
Friday, 9 to 4, 733 Salem Avenue. You're welcome to stop in and sign the petition. And in talking with people, I would say the biggest objection that I get is, well, what about the schools? Where are they going to get their funding? And I think it's
Mhm.
extremely important to kind of separate this movement and like the actual problem of, uh, you know, your house being at risk, where somebody from one of the local governments advised that you move out of your house. Let's separate that from the actual, like, what the dollars that you're being taxed with on your property actually go to fund. This movement is by no means stating that schools or sidewalks or public safety, they shouldn't be funded. It's just that it shouldn't be attached to your property.
That's right. We can talk a little bit more about that in a minute. There's a couple things you brought up there, and that one of them is the unrealized gains. I mean, think about it. You don't they don't come and get taxed from you on your TV every year. I mean, and it doesn't appreciate that. You don't come in the sectional couch I bought last year. I don't have to pay tax on that every year. I bought it. I own it. Your house is the only thing that you buy and you do not actually own outright. It's the only thing that they can come back and take it from you if you do not pay this tax. And that to me is problematic. It's like, when you figure, throughout your life, that's kind of the American dream. You buy a home, you pay for it, you take out a mortgage, and my goodness, some of these mortgages you pay for that home 2 and 3 and 4 times over by the time you're done paying for a mortgage at the end of 30 years. That's just kind of how it works. You want to go into a business, you go into the mortgage business because holy cow. But but anyway, so you pay that house off, you work hard, you pay that house off, and you still do not own it because if you for some reason cannot pay those taxes and they become too burdensome, you're out. They can sheriff sell your house and you're not going to get market value for that thing. There's a whole back end of this story that's just supremely problematic. How can you charge me based on a figure that my house hasn't sold? I mean, I last bought my house for $76,000. That's if I'm going to be taxed, I should be taxed on that amount. Kind of like Prop 13 out in California. Why would you tax me on this figure that I haven't seen yet because my house actually isn't sold for that? It just doesn't make good sense. First of all, it doesn't make good sense to come back every year and re-tax me on it. But then it doesn't make any sense to 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 put out an arbitrary figure that your house might sell for and charge a tax based on that. It's just so incredibly unfair. It's so incredibly unfair.
Yeah, I think Wall Street would be absolutely up in arms and potentially collapse, the American stock market in the event that the government came out and stated that your unrealized stock return gains would be taxed.
Absolutely. Can you imagine what your potential value might be, and then you have to pay tax in advance on that? I mean, it just doesn't. It doesn't make good sense. And here's the other thing. The other part of my discussions with folks that I talk to every day, it's like there's only a few of them that are like, no tax, no how, nowhere, no way, blah blah. That's rare. Most everybody wants to pay. They want to contribute to services in their town. They want to contribute to good public schools because let's face it, that's a good bet. You want to attract, what do you want to attract to your area where you live? You want to attract families and, you want a good area, you want all of those things, right? And you want to have excellent services. Heck, if something goes wrong, I want to be able to pick up the phone and call EMS or push my little granny button and have EMS show up. We want that, right? So that is not at question at all. And people don't mind paying for it. That's not the issue. The problem is when our taxes doubled in 10 years, some areas they tripled. Don't even get me started on farmers. And yet we still have, they're still requesting levies on many things. It's like, what? Levies? How is that possible when our property taxes have doubled and tripled in the last 10 years? It just doesn't make a lot of sense, Ryan, really. And, with people willing to pay, people want public schools. People want, that's, by the way, guaranteed to us in the Constitution. They aren't going away. what's going to happen is a shift of perspective and a shift of taxation. The taxing must shift to consumption and income, local. That's what it has to do because we have to have all those things. So I understand people's concern about public schools, police, EMS. Those are important services. We must have them, and they must get paid for. Uh, that's not a question, and that is a prudent the topic of discussion. But across Ohio, we have just let me throw this in real quick. There are already 212 cities across Ohio that use what's called a school district income tax to offset the burden on their homeowners and property owners for property tax. They're already doing this. It's like, why can't we do this on a statewide basis? I don't understand it.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think while all of these items need funding and it is great for your entire community, and nobody is trying to not pay for this, but the consequence of the school budgets increasing or needing additional money for parks shouldn't be that local people lose their home if they can't keep up to that cadence. And I think that's a really important distinction that needs to be made when people are, hearing that there's a movement out there to abolish property tax. It's
Yes,
not that, you know, any of these items aren't worth funding. It's the fact that the consequence for the costs that these parks or school systems need, the consequence of not being able to keep up with that should not be our local senior citizens or young families or anybody that purchased their house uh, to have to lose that. So,
right, right.
yeah.
So when we as we went along and we came to the conclusion that legislation just didn't have the heart to do anything. They just didn't have I mean, it takes a lot of courage to do something with property tax. It's like this big wobbly tower that you pull one block out and the whole thing could come tumbling down. And there's a lot of fear when they start monkeying around with property tax reform. And, you can see that in their, you know, uh, HB 335, in which they're trying to do something there. But there's a lot of fear there because how are they going to replace some of the funding and so on? And by the way, that's just common sense. I mean, you have to these services have to be paid for. So how are you going to replace it? I mean, it makes sense. So, I get it, but they've had plenty of opportunities. So when we finally came to the conclusion that it just wasn't going to happen unless we pushed the envelope. And so some folks got together, Keith Davey, who was kind of the founder of, we will say the founder of Citizens for Property Tax Reform. And some other folks got together, Brian Massey, Elaine Cross, John Mara, got together and said, all right, let's just do a ballot initiative and see how it goes. Let's do a ballot initiative. Let's try and get rid of property tax altogether. And then they'll be forced to shift what they're doing. They'll be forced. And so what they did was they did that, and they created the Committee to Eliminate Ohio Property Taxes, and they developed this petition and to eliminate property taxes. And Citizens for Property Tax Reform says we're backing it. We're backing it, and so that's how we're moving forward.
That makes a lot of sense. And just having seen firsthand a handful of things, in Columbus at the State House, and I was in law enforcement before I moved up here to Ohio. So I feel like I've got a glimpse in the way that the government works. And I couldn't imagine how difficult it is or would be for legislators to reform this. It's not an easy task, like you said. There's so many different people and so many different programs that are receiving funding from the property tax. And when you are talking about reform, I imagine it's pretty difficult to approach any one of these entities and attempt to talk about reducing the budget or somehow changing up the source of the funding, and just the amount of manpower that takes and the amount of people that are going to need to work together amongst all the other things they have going on politically. to solve this is probably insurmountable. So I completely agree that the citizens coming together, voting that you can no longer use property taxes, and then, like you said, pick up the pieces and find the funding in a more reasonable manner. That is going to force everybody to work together and actually uh, find a way to fix this. But I do
and,
know
and
that this is not a sustainable path that we're on.
no, in a more equitable manner, Ryan. Because listen, the argument that I've heard, I'm like, well, if you shift to sales tax and local income tax, they say, well, it's regressive. It's regressive. It's like I don't even. First of all, I don't quite understand that. But second of all, what is more regressive than pushing a senior citizen out of a home that they paid for lock, stock, and barrel, pushing them out into the street because they couldn't pay property taxes on an arbitrary valuation? I mean, I don't know how it gets much more regressive than that, frankly.
Right.
So I really think that that we can do this thing. And furthermore, if either way, this is a win-win because and while this is going through, while we're getting signatures on for the petition and we're moving forward and moving through we've got 75 counties as of today, 75 counties that are circulating petitions. While we're moving forward in this effort, legislature is trying to come up with some property tax reform legislation because if this hits the ballot, they're going to want to compete with it, right? They're going to need to compete with it. So either way, this is a win-win for Ohio citizens. And
I imagine it's a
for
little bit of damage control on their end.
yeah,
I
well, sure.
in reading through what they're proposing, it wouldn't quite have the impact. However, I do think that it is moving the needle in the right direction. I think you've already addressed one of the other objections that I noticed in the comments, which is, about the tenant and landlord situation. And as somebody that is in real estate investing and has to raise rents to keep up with rising taxes, rising insurance costs, you're right.
Mhm.
There are plenty of people that I do not want to raise the rents on. We try to be, we want, just as you said, we want people to love these homes. We want people to live in them a long time. Um, but when our hand is forced and when the margins are pressed, we really don't have any other options. So, yes, renters have a hand in this. They should also sign the petition. And getting rid of this piece, again, I think whatever equitable solution they come up with for taxes, that's going to be one less thing that they're going to have to worry about in their annual rent increases.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, do you have the other thing that I'm hit with immediately on these on when I am talking about this is, well, what do you propose, and where do you think this funding is going to come from? And I've got my thoughts on that, but I'm interested in on hearing yours as well.
Well, I'm not. I mean, first of all, I'm not a legislator. You know, uh, that said, there's only so many places they can go and get money, and um, and one of them is a consumption tax, sales tax. The other is local income tax. I mean, you figure if this is spread out amongst everybody that pays sales tax instead of just the 35% of the population that pays property tax, uh, that is without excluding pass through uh, with leases and rent. Um, that's a lot more palatable. And when you think about how much even if you doubled what you pay in sales tax, even if you doubled it, had to double it, you're still way under. I mean, I would be by a lot, way under what I pay in property tax. So, there's that. There's, like I said, school district income tax, which is already in play in 212 cities across the state. So, there's a lot of things that the state can do. And, they take quite a large share of, by the way, sales tax. They take quite a big chunk of it. We get a itty bitty little piece, and they get a big old chunk of that. Well, maybe it's time the state started sending back some of the money they clawed back in the early 2000s from the localities. Because considering we're paying the sales, I mean, come on. So there's a lot of opportunity for funding this thing. I mean, and it has to be funded because we have to have our schools, we have to have our city services. Those are all concerns, and they're important concerns. And but it's also important to know that we can't, if we don't have people paying tax, we don't have any of that. If we don't have people in their homes, if we're pushing elderly people out of their homes, I mean, what are we going to do? Shift people to subsidize from their homes into subsidized housing, so that we push them out. It's like it totally obliterates what we're trying to do. You
Absolutely.
know,
And my knee jerk reaction to this is, Ohio does not exist in a vacuum. We're not the only state that's dealing with this issue. In fact, as we discussed at the start of this, is Ohio is number six for the highest property taxes. So we've got over 40 states that we can look at and model something better after. So I'm sure every state has their own pros and cons, but there's a lot of room for improvement since Ohio is one of the most affordable states, yet somehow we managed to be number six in high property taxes. It just doesn't add up. And I also think, again, just as I was saying, that I think this bill and property taxes being abolished should be separated from the actual funding mechanisms of like what the property taxes go for. So we're not saying that schools should not be funded. Similarly, I believe that when it comes to alternative funding, yes, we believe that the schools should be funded. We believe that the parks should be funded. And we believe that, um, you know, so we don't want the funding to go away. But I also think it's extremely unfair to sit here and say, okay, so you want to live in your house, you don't want to lose it because of the increased property taxes. Well, in that to be the case, you need to figure out where the billions in lost property taxes are going to come from. It's not, to your
right?
point, you're not a legislator. It's not your responsibility to come up with alternative funding sources to want to be able to continue living in your home. It's a very unreasonable objection.
Yes, yes. Not to throw any rocks, but when you compare our property taxes to other say cities and states that have pro ball teams, pro sports teams. I mean, those pro sports teams are supposed to bring in tax revenues to our cities and state, and instead they seem to be a huge drain on us. I mean, we're having to put millions. I mean, they just now put through there's $600 million to fund a Browns stadium up here with, and we just built them a stadium 20 years ago that still isn't paid for yet. I mean, there's things like that that should be making us money, not having us put money into it. I don't understand this dynamic here. It just doesn't make good sense. And if it doesn't make sense, it shouldn't be happening, really. I mean, that doesn't make any sense because we're not getting money back on our investment, you know.
Yeah, I think through, I create this scenario of how that got passed in my head. And I guess you've got the sports team and the legislators, and those are the two parties involved in making that deal happen. But when you're
Mm-hmm.
talking about something as complex as abolishing property taxes, well, now you've got, instead of, two groups of people in the room, you've got a couple dozen. So
That's right.
the level of difficulty is uh, far higher to get this crossed than any one of us that's sitting here footing the bill can handle. We really need everybody at the state house to come together and work on this in order to get it resolved.
We really do, and they can't be. We can't I can't tell you what it does to people when you're having to figure out how you're going to pay that property back. So the property tax bill that just came, by the way, that was just due. That is just due, at least in our area. When you're having to come up with that money, trying to figure out how you're going to come up with that, and you're seeing our state fund all these other things, pro sports teams, new stadiums, all this stuff. It's very disappointing, and it's very, I don't even know the word. I can't even put it into words. It's just like kind of a kick in the pants. It's a kick in the teeth, to us homeowners that are trying so hard to keep our head above water. You know,
Absolutely. I think, again, these numbers, I'm a little bit fuzzy. I think the average homeowner in Ohio pays about $3,800 per year in property tax. Is that?
that sounds about right. I think that's probably pretty close to right. I'm north of that, but that I live in Cuyahoga County, so
Yeah,
yeah,
just
that
for
sounds
just for
about right.
reference of everybody else in other states that are listening in. I remember in North Carolina, is where I lived previously. I don't think it's uncommon for many states to have significant. Well, obviously, we're the sixth highest in property taxes, so the majority of states out here are going to be empathetic and realize, yes, that is a very high number. So, if you are not in the state of Ohio and are watching this, please forward this to somebody that you know that lives in Ohio. In order for this to be successful, this movement, while it has a ton of momentum already, uh, we really need to get the word out there. I talk to people on a daily basis who aren't yet aware. They are just learning of this, so we've got a lot of marketing and a lot of news spreading to get out there. And then also, what I've found really interesting and encouraging is the majority of the people that stop by our office are asking for petitions to go door to door in
Woohoo!
local neighborhoods. So,
Let me give you some information, Ryan. Let me give you some information. Um,
absolutely.
they can go on. They can go on reformpropertytax.com. That gets you to Citizens for Property Tax Reform. You're going to go on reformpropertytax.com and enter your email address and your name, and that'll get you on. That'll get you our emails. And then when you get our email, we'll respond to you. You respond. You reply to our email, and I'll set you up with a circulator packet if you're interested. Um, and Ryan, what you're talking about. You have a signing station, and because we're not backed by millions of dollars, we don't have paid petition circulators out there. We have to do this word of mouth, volunteer by volunteer by volunteer, citizen by citizen by citizen. So what I've found works well for us are what are called signing stations, like you are at Ingram Insurance Group, and where people can go in and sign. Somebody calls up and says, I want to sign a petition. I can send them to you. I can send them, or where is it in my area? And I've got lists. I've got lists that I send out to all of our members across Ohio, and they disseminate that information to their friends and families and neighbors. And that's how we're going to do this thing. So, you can get set up with all that. Again, that's reformpropertytax.com. We have a sister organization that is up and running called AX Ohio Tax. That's AXOHTAX.com. AX Ohio Tax. But, just come on over to reformpropertytax.com, enter your name and your email address, and you'll hear from us.
That sounds good to me. I think everybody in Ohio should get involved. That's AXOHtax.com. I got that right?
Yep, it's AXOHTAX.com. Reform Property Tax is me. See the Systems for Property Tax Reform right there. That's our logo right here.
Yep. I think I can go ahead and get that up there as well. Yep.
Yeah,
There you
there
are.
you
So
go.
this your
Yep,
contact information. Your
that's
phone
my
number's on
contact
there.
information.
I've had
Yep,
your email rolling. And yeah, I think, again, I'm really encouraged by all the momentum that this movement already has. I've started getting probably a dozen phone calls per day since I have signed up as the signing
that's
station.
fantastic. Fantastic, fantastic.
So, is there? I guess before we end, is there anything else you'd like for people to know about this
Yeah, you
movement
know what?
or getting involved or spreading the
There's
word?
one more thing. Yeah, I mean, get a hold of us to get involved. Get a hold of us. The other thing is that the most heartening part of this whole thing is this is a bipartisan movement. Um, it doesn't seem like for once we have an, an issue here that everybody wants to work on, and I think that's just wonderful. It's a tough thing that we're doing, but everybody's in. Everybody's in.
Yeah, that's really encouraging.
Mm.
I think we covered it all.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Ryan. I appreciate it. Thank
Yeah.
you for setting this up.
Thanks for joining us today. That was a great interview with Beth Blackmar. If you are not in the state of Ohio, then please share this with anybody that you know, that you might even think lives in the state of Ohio. And if you do live here in Ohio, please visit reformpropertytax.com to get involved, and let's continue building this momentum together because it will take all of us. If you are in Montgomery County, then I have signed up the insurance agency, Ingram Insurance Group, as a signing station. We are accepting walk ins to sign the petition Monday to Friday from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. So thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to speaking with you all soon.